What's up YouTube? Today we're going to be covering tips on how to change the oil on a Yamaha YFZ-450R. Alright guys, this video is going to be helpful if you have any type of four-wheeler that needs an oil change. Now we're going to be doing it on a YFZ-450 by Yamaha, but the oil change process is virtually the same on pretty much all the makes and models. Alright guys, now let's cover the tools and the supplies to successfully complete the oil change. Okay, so as far as the minimum tools that you'll need, a basic socket set, a ratchet, a drain bucket, and some rags. Now it's also nice to have some type of measuring cup to be able to measure the amount of oil that you're putting into the engine. And then it's also nice to have a torque wrench to get the drain plugs to the proper torque. All right guys, as far as the supplies that you need, in addition to the correct engine oil, you want to get oil drain plug washers, an oil filter, the oil filter O-ring, and a can of brake cleaner. All right guys, now let's take a moment and cover the most important thing, and that is the type of oil that you're going to put into your quad. Now, it really doesn't matter the brand, so to speak, whether it's Valvoline or Bel-Ray, Yamalube, or a Honda oil, or any on the temperature that you ride your quad at. If it's extremely cold, you might want to go with something like a 5W30. But in the average temperatures, it's generally best to go with a 1040 on most quads. And then on some cases where the heat may be really extreme, if you're riding in the desert, or if you're using the machine strictly for racing, a 2050 might be better. However, the best thing to do is look in your owner's manual, and it'll have a little guide in there to tell you exactly the type of oil that you want to put in it. And that's the most important rule there, is put in the oil that your machine is required to have. Now, just about every type of ATV out there, you cannot put car oil in it like this. This is a very common, popular oil that we put in our cars, a 5W30 synthetic blend, high mileage. The main reason why you can't put this in is it has energy conserving in it. You can't use the typical car or truck engine oil in your quad because the oil actually lubricates the transmission as well, where this type of oil isn't designed to run through the clutches and the transmission on your quad, where this type of oil here is a basic mineral oil, and it will work perfectly for your ATV's engine along with the transmission. All right guys, so let's get doing the oil change on this quad. I've got all the supplies that I need. I've got the Yamalube oil filter gasket, I've got the drain plug gaskets, so let's get going on this oil change. Alright guys, before you change your oil, I highly recommend that you wash your engine first, so that you don't run any risk of getting any dirt or mud mixed in with where the oil filter mounts or into any of the oil passages inside the engine. Alright guys, the next step is to go ahead and remove this skid plate right below the frame here. So that the engine oil will drain better, go ahead and remove the dipstick. On this engine here you have two 12mm drain plugs. You have one right here and then another one right towards the front of the engine. Now, some engines like the Honda and other Yamaha models, you'll have another engine cooler up towards the radiator that you'll have to drain as well. So make sure that you drain your external engine oil cooler if it has one. This particular motor, you just have one drain plug here and one drain plug here. Go ahead and break loose your oil drain plugs. Alright guys, while your oil drain plugs are draining, go ahead and undo the oil filter cover. It's got 2 bolts, or actually 3 bolts that hold it on, and this one is kind of a drain plug for the oil filter. Go ahead and remove the cover. Alright, so now it's time to remove the old oil filter and install your new one. You want to make sure that you install the oil filter in the same way that your old one comes out. Now, if you put this oil filter in here backwards, you can see here on this particular quad, it has the hole opening on this side versus, you know, if you put it in backwards here, you can see that the oil passage would not go through, so you'd have start the engine with oil if you put this in backwards. So make sure you put it in like this when you install it. Also on this model, you've got 3 O-rings right here. You want to make sure there's no tears or that they're not real flat or damaged. If those 3 O-rings are damaged at all, make sure you get new ones. And then this one here is the oil filter cover. Now, it has an O-ring here as well. I always recommend replacing this O-ring, which I've got the new O-ring here. Wipe any dirt off of this surface area here so you get a good seal to your oil filter cover. Go ahead and remove the oil filter by pulling it out and install your new filter. Basically, you just push the oil filter back in there, remove your old O-ring out of the filter cover, install the new O-ring, reinstall the bolts. Don't tighten the bolts all the way down at this point, just snug them up. Go ahead and tighten the bolts in a cross pattern. Again, just kind of snug the bolts up. Another thing that's not a bad idea to have is one of these service manuals here. This is nice because it has all your torque specifications, part numbers, filter types, exact instructions. You don't have to have this, especially with this video here. However, this is nice to have to refer to for exact specifications of your quad. So, not a bad idea to look up and find one of these service manuals for your machine. Like specifically here, these bolts here that have the oil filter cover are supposed to be torqued down to a specific torque. And the oil filter element cover bolts are supposed to be 10 Newton meters, where the drain plugs are tightened down to 20 Newton meters. Now this is a torque wrench here. This is a Tecton torque wrench that I picked up from the Cal Ranch store. And this is a fairly inexpensive torque wrench. So if you don't have one of these, I think I picked this one up for like 40 bucks. I'll leave a link to the description below. So this is a good inexpensive option that's going to be a little bit better than just kind of winging the torque. I mean, obviously if you don't have one of these, you can still tighten them down. Just be careful not to over tighten them or leave them too loose. This is going to be nice because it's going to get you fairly close to that 10 Newton meters that they want you to set it to. All right, so I've got the torque wrench dialed in at 10 Newton meters. I'm going to go ahead and tighten the bolts down until it clicks. Okay, so you can see I'm going ahead and rotating around, tighten up all the bolts here, and the torque wrench basically stops power once it hits that 10 Newton meters. It's really important that you don't over tighten this because you don't want to strip these bolts out and strip out your crankcase cover. Okay, so here's where I like to take some brake clean and spray off some of that oil so that you don't have dirt attracting to your filter cover. Just spray it off a little brake clean and then go ahead and wipe it down. Alright guys, now it's time to reinstall your oil drain plugs. Now these have a little copper gasket on them that is good for maybe a couple oil changes. I like to change them every time, but that copper gasket actually starts to wear, and I like to install a new copper gasket with every oil change. Go ahead and take your new copper crush washer and put it onto your drain plug, and do that with both of them, and then go ahead and tighten the drain plugs up. These drain plugs you torque to 20 Newton meters. Okay, so now take your torque wrench, set to 20 Newton meters, and it's tight. Alright guys, just go ahead and tighten up your final drain plug. Alright, so using a funnel here, take your oil and go ahead and add the oil to the engine. Now, it's important that you put the exact or close to the exact amount that the engine holds so you don't over or underfill it. All right guys, so I don't over or underfill the engine. I've predetermined that this is the exact amount of oil that the engine holds. All right guys, so at this point I've got all the drain plugs properly torqued. I've got a new oil filter in there. I've got that filter cover torqued, new gaskets. I've got the engine oil filled. Now we've got to double check the engine oil level. Now to do this, you want to reinstall your oil dipstick and then let the engine run for about 10 minutes. All right guys, while the engine's running, before you check the engine oil level, double check your drain plugs and your oil filter cover to make sure they're not leaking any oil. All right guys, so I've let the engine run for about 10 minutes. Now it's time to double check the engine oil level. So remove your dipstick and wipe it clean. Now with the oil dipstick, you don't screw it all the way back down to check the level, you just set it in there. Some manufacturers are a little bit different, but most of them just go by this method here rather than screwing it all the way down. Just go ahead and set the dipstick back into the crankcase. And you just want to make sure you're in a safe level, and I am just below the full mark at this point, so I'm going to add just a little bit more oil to it. All right guys, now I'm excited to ride this thing. I'm going to take it out to the sand dunes here in just a little bit. Put the sand tires on it, take it for a spin. Got the oil level set to the exact amount. I've got all the drain plugs tight. I've got the oil filter tight. Now I've just got to install the skid plate, put the sand tires on it, and it's ready to ride.